2, 1. Hello YouTube! This is Sonic Sun and it is still March 24th, 2007. I'm gonna fill up a lot of these tapes pretty soon. There's only an hour per tape on these DV things. So now I'm gonna talk about something entirely different. I just finished on Hayao Miyazaki. Today, or for the moment, I'm going to talk about ontology. What is ontology, you might ask? Well, ontology is the branch of philosophy which is devoted to the studying of existence. All this I learned not because of some philosophy course, but because of a great thing called Wikipedia. In case you haven't heard of it, you're odd. How did you not hear Wikipedia? You're on YouTube. Go to Wikipedia, look up ontology, you can see basically everything I know about the subject now, except for the thoughts I've had about the subject after I started reading the article. Ontology seeks to define how something exists, and when it's created or destroyed, as opposed to just changed. And I think it's a kind of pointless thing, actually. And that's not because I think that philosophy in general is really pointless if it's, you know, too far-fetched or something. No, I can see thinking about big concepts and stuff, but there's a fundamental problem with this. Another thing I looked up, I looked at existence. I googled it, and there's a guy wondering about existence and the paradox of it, because, how can something be said to exist, he says. At what point does it exist? At what point is it not? For instance, if you had some prophet and he says, there will be a boy named Joe and he will be born in 20 years, and he will have brown hair or whatever. And 20 years later, Joe is born, and the prophet can now say, now Joe exists. Problem being, says this guy writing the article, is that, you previously said Joe will exist. Now, if in order to reference Joe has to exist in order for you to talk about him. And then you say now he exists later. So the question is, what is existence? And how do you define it? And I think the whole ontology debate is pretty silly that way. I like philosophy, but sometimes it gets wrapped up in little semantic things and doesn't really go anywhere. As I see it, existence is what we might call a spectralmalistic property. A spectralmalistic property. And I'm sure you're wondering what on earth I meant by that. Well, you know what a spectrum is, right? If you start a spectrum is when you have two things, say good and evil, right? And it's not that there's a dividing line. Okay, everything in this side is good, everything in this side is evil. There's a spectrum. You could be more or less evil, and you could be more or less good, and you go through the whole thing, kind of a steady slope up through possibilities. But there's no direct lines to it. I think we say something exists or doesn't exist. It's a spectralmalistic property, much like, say, size. Now, size exists. Size is one of the things that separates me from the Earth, makes us different, right? But you cannot, no one thinks, okay, well, how do we define size? How do we say when something is big versus when something is small? We all recognize that that's entirely based on your perspective, based on where you might arbitrarily draw the line. For the Earth is big in comparison to, your house, but your house is big in comparison to an ant, and the ant is small in comparison to the solar system, but the solar system itself is small in comparison to the galaxy. And it all depends on what thing you want to go with. There's no dividing line. There's no, everything over here is small, and once you get past this line, now you're big. And there's it doesn't happen that way. It's spectralmalistic. And if you want to say things are big or small, you have to arbitrarily define something. Like we define, the human body as the standard size, then a house is big, and, a keyboard is small, or a camera for that matter. Okay. But we go and take that analogy to existence. Things, and maybe a little more complicated than this, I know, but things, how much it exists is more of a spectrum. You have, on one end of the spectrum, it's completely unchangeable and solid and objective, and everyone can see it and knows about it, and there's nothing you could do about it. Something like the laws of physics. You might say the laws of physics exist because they're there and they're objective, They really, really exist, you might say. It's not a phrase, because then we think of existence as a binary property. On the other end of the spectrum, it's more like, you know, just some idea that's floating in one person's head, and it's just there fleetingly and has no real effect on anything, and therefore it has a small amount of existence, we might say. So, going back to the paradox of the prophet and the boy Joe who was born, the problem here is not, we don't know exactly where existence is. The thing is, he's just progressing along a spectrum of existence, and we use the word existence defining two different arbitrary points, just as we might say with size, the word big would be dependent on some arbitrary measurement of that. So when you know, the prophet says Joe will exist, he means exist from the perspective of, well, now he has to be a physical thing in order to exist, right? But Joe already exists in a lesser sense because he exists as an idea. See what I'm saying? So there's no line to be discovered. There's no this and that. There's no thing where, you know, we can just define it like it's some, you know, objective thing. It's a spectrum. So you can place the you can place this line, an arbitrary line, wherever you like. You put it on one side of the thing, you might say nothing exists because everything is impermanent, everything can be changed, everything, you know, works in that way, and so nothing really exists. It's all more depending on your perspective and where you happen to be at the time. Put it on the other side of the spectrum, we would say everything exists because everything exists as an idea, right? Like the Guvok. The Guvok is a planet which is just beyond Neptune and before Pluto. Now you might say that doesn't exist. There is no planet between Neptune and Pluto. Well, there is now, not actually in the physical world, but in my mind. I just invented Guvok, and there's a big planet going out there. That's our 9th planet, and Pluto's the 10th planet, or 10th dwarf planet, as the case may be. It exists as an idea, with a, we might say, small amount of existence, which is perhaps a simplification of the thing. But there's a spectrum to it. For instance, if I said, you know, Mars exists, well, exists as an idea in my head, and furthermore, as a physical object that's actually there. The idea, of course, not perfectly matching the physical object, because no idea is exactly perfect. We have false perspectives on things, but they being somewhat matching. That somewhat matching, by the way, also being spectralmalistic property as to whether something is very, very accurate, or somewhat accurate, or not accurate at all. So we can do anything we want with this. And the same thing with creation, destruction, changing, you know, where that all comes in. You can define that however you like. If I make a house, you know, and I take all these trees, I chop them down, and I make a house, I could say that I destroyed the trees and I created a house. Or I could say that I took the trees and did a massive change and made them into a house, right? Because when we say creation and destruction, that's really shorthand for just a massive change of some sort. And that's how I feel about ontology. There's no lines to be discovered, there's no fundamental thing which separates this from that existence. It's a spectralmalistic property, as I see it, you see. And so, the study of ontology is kind of bunk. And as far as I can tell, is not very useful unless there's some other branches of ontology which might be more useful that I don't know about. But basically, no. You don't need it. Spectralmalistic property, at least that's a simplistic way of saying it. Existence, the word existence is defined in the same way the word big might be defined. You have to invent some kind of perspective to define something as big and something as small, etc., etc. So that's how I think about ontology. Any philosophers out there, or any non-philosophers, what do you think? See you later.